124th episode of the Veritas Fact Finding series, and today I'm joined by my longtime friend, Mark Nawacki. Mark, good morning.
Good morning. Nice to see you.
Thanks. We're back again live to go on the ground to speak to industry professionals in an unscripted, candid video format to discover how we can make better investment decisions. If you're watching and you like what you hear, give us a like and follow us at www.veritascorp.com. I have a quick disclaimer. This broadcast is not to be taken as investment advice, and participants and or employees of the Veritas group of companies may own securities discussed in this broadcast. And while we love all our guests, and Mark in particular, the session may contain forward-looking statements, investment opinions, and comments that we do not agree with at all. Now I want to give you just a very quick background on Mark. Mark and I, we were just musing prior to getting started here that we've known each other exactly 30 years pretty much. Around this time, we both started at Arthur Andersen. We got our CPA. And then after roughly 3 years of being there, we both went in different directions. Mark started out a consumer packaging company with Green Giant, if you can imagine, and turned that into a trailblazing career in the pharmaceutical industry. He co-founded and CEO, his most recent venture was Searchlight Capital, and he's still there. He scaled it from 1 million to 100 million in less than 10 years through a number of strategic global acquisitions and partnerships. And he was recently sold in a big acquisition with Apotex. And this is not the first time he's done this. He was a key player at Paladin Labs, driving revenues there from 20 million to 300 million, leading expansions in Africa, Latin America, and he played a pivotal role in its eventual sale to Endo Health in 2014, and that was a $3.2 billion sale. He has an MBA and a BA from U of T, so we're also went to the same alma mater. And he's been involved in a number of different industry groups, Canadian Healthcare Licensing Association, and is an active contributor to the Licensing Executive Society. I want you to stay tuned to hear Mark's incredible journey, innovation, growth, strategies behind the success, and whether you're here looking for investment insights so that we can understand how to look at growth by acquisition stories, because that's always been something that continues to come up as we're making investments. So with that, Mark, I want to start out really at the beginning with you and tell us your story in your own words. How do you go from being a CPA and then your career is veered in so many different directions within the pharmaceutical industry?
Thanks, Anthony. It's great to join you, and thank you for the opportunity. As we were musing about 30 years ago, I think when we used to trudge in on Saturday mornings for the training from, preparing us for that UFI, we used to get lectured about general purpose and giddy gap. And I think what I took away from that was that my interest was ultimately in understanding those businesses and being involved in those businesses. Others choose to approach from a different angle. But so, I certainly looked for opportunities within Andersen. I moved into the financial advisory service practice, whatever it was called back then, because they keep changing the name of these groups. But I remember doing a number of different projects that, while they were interesting, I remember doing a valuation assignment on some sort of pasta manufacturer and a consulting assignment or workout on something else. And I was always, we'd get to the end of the project, and as interesting as the project was, I'd always be wondering, well, what ended up happening? What did they do? Did they live up to that valuation? Did the recommendation work? I really had the desire to get involved into the business. And so I had the opportunity to go to a consumer packaged goods giant, and I thought back in the day that was a smart move to get kind of a classical sales and marketing organization exposure. And Pillsbury, which was the parent company of Green Giant at that point, it was ultimately rolled into Diageo, which was a big conglomerate that included beverages and alcohol. Was just so strong at understanding consumer behavior and understanding the needs of a consumer. And I loved that couple of years that I was there. But my story in terms of how I landed in pharma, a recruiter came knocking, and the technology, it was, the innovation potential of this industry was what really fascinated me. And I don't have a science background, but I just thought that this was absolutely incredible, from going from frozen and canned vegetables and processed foods to being able to work in an industry that tries to help and cure fascinated me, and that was a really interesting period in time where, again, just so many blockbuster drugs were coming out. It was a really fascinating journey. So that took me there. You and I connected in the spring when we were first chatting and catching up, and I told you how my initial experience going into that world, um, as a finance person initially,
Yep.
there was a lot of skepticism around, hey, can this guy really get involved? There used to be a sales manager who always used to say, oh, here comes Mark, we're going to get the sermon on the amount. But I found that in that particular industry at that time, there wasn't the, again, having come out of packaged goods where the margins were relatively tight, and again, that need to understand consumer behavior and how behavior changes, really linked to ROI. And that was something that I found lacking in pharma at the time. There wasn't a really strong understanding of what worked. Again, it's an industry that's blessed by good margins overall. And sometimes, the attitude is, hey, we're not sure which of these programs or tactics is working, but let's not alter them because one of them is. And I found that as a CPA dissatisfying. I really did want to understand what worked, what didn't. And throughout my, what I loved in the professional services firm was the opportunity to be involved at a bigger level, at a strategic level, at a transactional level. That started to present itself pretty early in my career because, again, the background as a CA, CPA, it's just such a fantastic set of knowledge and training for being able to assess and analyze information and really think strategically at a transactional level. So that's where I started to transition into the licensing and business development partnering side of the business, and I love it. As strong as the internal R&D activities of all of the large players was, and I started my career in large multinationals in Canada, even back then, over 50% of pipeline came from externally sourced technology or assets. So partnering activity broadly defined was a critical success factor to the industry. It's something that I ended up finding blended all of my interests, and kind of my jack of all trades, master of none capability really lent itself well to being able to play in that arena. And the rest is history, as they say. But I've had some absolutely incredible experiences, both in terms of business, in terms of meeting fantastic, incredible people all over the world, and doing some things that I've considered to be really super fun. So I guess that's what took me to pharma. I don't know. I don't know that there's a straight path for anybody, but for me, that was kind of the circuitous path that got me there.
And then after working at Paladin with a bigger team and growing that business, you started off and went off to Searchlight Pharma. How did that happen, and why did you decide to do that?
Paladin was an incredible experience, and I worked with some brilliant people. First and foremost, Jonathan Goodman, who was the energy and the life force behind that business. Um, I loved every minute of that, but coming out of that experience, I was always left wondering how much of it was because of him as opposed to how much of it was me. And so there was certainly an underlying desire to be able to validate that I did have something to do with this, and that it wasn't just me being lucky, both in place and time, to have been part of his journey. I also, opportunities like that where you exit, and whether it's an exit like that was, where it's a sale or whether you're sometimes restructured in businesses, becomes a really incredible opportunity to soul search and do some introspection from a professional development career perspective. I spent quite a bit of time that year, and I had time, in advance of the transaction closing, to start to think about what I wanted to do. I actually thought I might want to move more into the financial area, be more on the buy side in terms of deployment of capital within the sector, and was exploring a number of different things. But as that kept going, I realized that, at least at that point in time, what I really wanted to do was go back and try to do it again, and do it on my own, again, for the reason I said, to validate that it wasn't just a fluke. Also, there were many things. As much as I loved every moment of it and loved the team and what we did, there were things that I identified that, certainly I wanted to do differently. And this was that desire to test my thesis and see if it would work was pretty powerful for me. So at the end of the day, I was lucky enough that an opportunity presented that enabled kind of getting a business seeded and started with assets as well as capital. And the rest, again, is history, as they say. But yeah, a number of kind of different factors that kind of influenced my thought process at the time. And it didn't happen overnight. It was a process that I went through that convinced me that that's ultimately what I wanted to do.
When you boil it all down, you had this internal passion that said, I need to do this. I want to do this. I got to prove that I can. I find, having interviewed so many different entrepreneurs, that it's not time. You didn't think about it and go, I need to make a whole bunch of money. You said, this means something and I want to do it, and I'm doing it for those reasons. And I can't tell you how many people I've coached that want to become entrepreneurs, and I say, it's not about, hey, I'm going to do this because it's going to make me $1 billion. It's like, no, I believe in this, and then the $1 billion comes, maybe.
It had nothing to do with the money, and there's nothing rational about it either. I mean, one of my investors is fond of saying that you've got to be a little bit crazy to be an entrepreneur. I actually think you have to be really crazy to be an entrepreneur. When you think about the risks, the challenges,
Yep.
it's nothing about it is obvious or simple. You don't do it because it's the easy, comfortable way, and there's no guarantee of success. We know how poor the statistics are for success or failure. So there's got to be a deeper purpose for it. Again, for me, there were a whole bunch of different reasons why, and I took time to get there and convincing myself that I was ready to jump off the cliff and do it. But yeah, it's an irrational desire that pushes you to do it. And if you're good and lucky, sometimes it works out.
So what key lessons and strategies can you share with us about scaling a business?
I don't know that I'm going to have anything incredibly insightful to tell you. People used to tell me, "Oh, do it. How hard can it be?" So I guess my first thing would be to say, it's hard. It's really hard. And you need to be absolutely committed and focused to it. People used to, when I was going through that process that I described earlier, and I would speak with other entrepreneurs, and they would say, "Are you sure you want to do this? It's really difficult." And I'd say, "Look, I've done difficult things. I've worked hard. I've worked long hours." They say, "No, that you don't understand. It's not like that. There's more to it." And I think there's truth to that. I think anyone who chooses to start something themselves needs to understand that it is a commitment like nothing else they've done career-wise. For one, you can't shut it off. For as long as you're doing it, it is you. It is, you think about it all the time. I remember Jonathan Goodman and I, we used to spend a lot of time together just talking. We would be brainstorming ideas, and he would sometimes confide in me the nervousness he felt, or the responsibility he felt for the people. You realize that there are people paying for mortgages and putting food on the table. never really understood that in a really true deep meaning until I started something and I felt the same thing. So again, that feeling of responsibility, um, I think, you quickly realize, I think, if you're lucky enough to make it through the initial euphoria, that you can't do it by yourself. You need a team. You need people who are like-minded, who are trustworthy. At a certain point, it's just you burn out if you try to do everything yourself, and that's a surefire recipe for disaster. I think the other part is, and again, I think it goes to a little bit about how you conduct yourself in life and in business. In order to be an entrepreneur, someone has to give you a chance somewhere along the way. And in order for someone to give you that chance, they're really banking on you, right? It's about you as a person, your reputation. You may have a track record, you may not. And depending on the situation, that track record may be more or less important. But at the end of the day, people are betting on the jockey. And if you don't have that level, and again, I think it's less about the track record and more about the person. If you're the sort of person that just doesn't get along well in the sandbox, if you can't conduct yourself in a way that people say, I enjoy being in the room with that person, I enjoy being associated with their project, it's going to be tough to be successful, right? And I know everyone can throw out an example of where that is the case, but I think you need to, again, how you conduct yourself and the network that you create and the opportunities that come out of that network are not accidental. It's by design. Certain people are able to pull those strings because, again, all of us need to get a break somewhere, right?
Right.
However that is. So for me, it's a whole lot of basics and it's a whole lot of behavioral basics. Yes, you got to be smart. Yeah, you got to have the right background and, understanding finance and understanding marketing and all the other elements of business are important. But it's those behavioral qualities that I think really make it possible.
Interesting. So, how do you, let's try to dig into some specifics about making the decisions as you're going through and evaluating, different products, perhaps the partnership on different companies to take over, and why I think this is so relevant to our listeners. And I want to remind everybody this is live, so if you want to put a question in the chat, I'll make sure that Mark addresses it. But when you're looking at these transactions and these opportunities to scale, how is it, what are the key things you look for? And then so that when we're evaluating from the outside, we're trying to say, okay, is management making a good decision in their acquisition process? We can ask the right questions. We can look for the right goalposts.
So, from the management side, I think it is always a blend of strategy and opportunism. So the strategic thinking, the strategic vision has to be there. I think you need to define an objective that you're reaching towards, and hopefully it is an aspirational one and not just one that's easy to do. But life continually throws you curveballs, and I think the ability to go with it when something develops or comes along that may not exactly fit the whiteboard ideas that were created at your session, whenever that was, that becomes the art of the possible. So I think you're always, and I think the evidence has refuted the idea of left brain and right brain thinkers, but you're always trying to blend the financial rigor and discipline and process with the creative aspect of business. Um, for me, we knew that our business model ultimately depended on the ability to represent others who did not have presence in the Canadian market. So we were really trying to position ourselves as a partner of choice for people who otherwise would not operate here, wouldn't bring their assets here. And so from, the bread and butter of our business was the in licensing transactions, the distribution agreements that we signed. Those are all tests of why am I the best partner? Why should I trust my jewels or my, my baby with you as opposed to somebody else. And I think, again, I think about those as long-term relationships, right? Where, um, you know, how you behave in that relationship and the trust that you create is important. The acquisitions that we did, whether they were assets or corporate acquisitions, I mean, those become those have to be disciplined financial exercises. Yes, there needs to be a strategic rationale to them, but from a pure financials perspective, I think the price you pay is so critical, right? If you overpay on an asset, it's so difficult. The headwinds to get an ROI on a transaction like that are so challenging. And again, we know what the statistics are on failed M&A.
Yes.
So I think you need to be disciplined, but it's more than that. I think, again, being connected to your market, understanding the dynamics and the players. And at the end of the day, we made a decision to go after assets that weren't perfect, right? So again, a confidence in the ability of the team to problem solve and to think creatively as to how do we acquire things at a lower valuation, but are able to fix those and improve those assets and those businesses in order to ensure that we ultimately get them to the type of valuation that investors will appreciate and like. So I think that's an important piece, because if you buy the perfect business, you're going to have to pay for it,
Yeah.
and that's not a great way to build a business. I mean, sometimes you do it if there's a strategic rationale and you absolutely want to get into a particular vertical. But again, we took the route of trying to look for assets that had some hair on them, and that required a whole lot of sweat equity on the part of the team to improve them. And so you go in eyes wide open, knowing that there are challenges, but knowing the work that you need to do, and you're informed by the diligence that you do. And again, the team, that's why I go back to the team that you have around you needs to understand what the project entails, right? You can't just hand it off to someone else who wasn't connected with that diligence exercise. So that was certainly the way we thought about it at a big picture level.
Interesting. So let's pivot and take it now to where we are in the pharmaceutical industry today. And our listeners and those watching would be, investing in the pharmaceutical sector. What trends, what opportunities do you think we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, and I think, look, what I would say is this is ultimately a knowledge industry, an innovation industry. I think it's important to always be asking the question of what unmet need is being achieved by a particular technology or asset or company. I think, and again, unmet needs, there can be a gamut of those. That can be a clinical or medical unmet need that a particular technology comes in and addresses. Sometimes it's a market need, right? Where again, a competitor comes in at a substantially improved cost or in a better form of delivery of something. So I think you always need to be asking yourself, is there an unmet need, and is this addressing it, and how well is it addressing it relative to any other options that are there? I think, given that we're talking about knowledge and innovation, again, the intellectual property that's associated with that is again very important to understand. And again, the world has become more complicated now. You don't necessarily need to only rely on traditional intellectual property. There are all sorts of different rules around data exclusivity that are available to these players, depending on the type of asset that they develop. So again, I think being able to understand what is the period of exclusivity for these types of investments that require such tremendous upfront investment and cost and time. And certainly if you're interested in the specialty pharma piece of the industry, which is where I really spent the last 25 plus years of my life, at the end of the day, you got to be looking at the profitability and cash flow of these businesses. So to me, it'd be those three things. If I think about trends, and Anthony, I'll put the disclaimer that I'm not a scientist and I'm not a researcher. So you've come to the wrong place if you think I'm going to give you the secret that's out there. But what I find interesting right now, and certainly I'm spending time thinking about, one is, I'm sure most people have at this point heard about the GLP-1s, the Ozempics and Wegovys of the world. I mean, this class of drugs is transformational and exciting. And again, I think we're scratching the surface of what they can do and the impact that they will have clinically and medically. I think again, there are a range of new indications potentially that are going to come out of these drugs. I think there will be, relatively soon, new competition and potentially lower prices on these products as exclusivity periods come to a close on some of these assets. So again, I think how that weaves its way into our medical, into medicine and into society is going to be really fascinating to watch. I think a second trend, is, and again, it's a bit of a cliche and a bit of an overused term, but it's AI. And how will AI address drug development? How will it address decision making? I was exposed by a friend to an idea recently, an AI tool that is able to comb through all of the clinical data that's published and available in a particular class of molecules in order to just try to improve the response of patients to the first drug that they're prescribed and use, and the ability, if you can just improve the odds of success from 1 in 3 to 1 in 2, like the
That's
impact
massive.
that you make is massive, right? So again, I think the ability of AI to kind of comb through big data and look at that. And then I think the third one for me that I'm really interested in is psychedelics and just the potential that they hold in the mental health space, right? So this has been such a challenging, and again, the prominence of mental health has risen in our society, and I think thankfully it has risen and gained necessary attention. But again, the therapeutics and approaches that we have today don't address the problem adequately. These drugs, these molecules that are being now developed in a rigorous kind of clinical evidence approach are truly interesting. And again, there's a whole whack of companies that are going to be producing pivotal data in the next 12 to 18 months that I think will determine whether or not these are promising and what role they will play in therapy going forward. So just a few of the things that I'm personally interested in. Yeah.
Interesting. We had on another session, I think now it's a couple years, I had Hans Clark, he's Dr. Hans Clark. He's the head of the study, a Department of Anesthesia and Pain Management at Toronto General Hospital. And he's actually very involved in understanding how psychedelics will affect pain management. There's an entire like a section within the hospital there where he is a Toronto General Hospital that looks at that, mental health, etc. So we had an interesting discussion about this. But it's interesting you bring that up. Others I've spoken to say that's a huge trend. Okay, just trying to pull this together. I think you've given us good advice from the standpoint of what makes a good entrepreneur, a good leader. Maybe just step it back to and let's talk to some of our new students that are in university and they're making decisions. And you and I have talked about this, and it's one of my objectives, mission in life is to help these students make good decisions with their careers, and specifically thinking about accounting and where that fits in. So maybe you could give some advice to students and those considering what to do with their careers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, and I share your passion for that and the sense of frustration that somehow what we did 30 years ago is no longer as interesting to a whole new cohort of people. And yet I think again, it's such a fantastic training ground. It's such a discipline that it develops for thinking about how to organize the world and business within it. To me, it's indispensable for providing a background that can open virtually any door. So, again, look what you did. It's completely different from what I'm doing today.
Yes.
And yet we started in the exact same place, right? And we
Yep.
listened to the exact same Saturday lectures all day. It's just, for me, there is no better training ground. And
Yep.
I can understand. And I think, I see it in my own kids. I have a 24-year-old daughter who's in her first job today. And I've got a 21-year-old and a 17-year-old who are, kind of nipping at her heels. There is an impatience in that generation to want to do big things and to try to contribute to solving the big ideas. And I love that, and I appreciate that, and I want to nurture that, and I want to put all the wind in the sails for that. But, these are complex things that we need to solve going forward. We need people who are equipped to be able to do that and can think across a whole bunch of different functional areas and integrate it, right? It's when I talk to young people who come into my office and they say, how do you move forward? To me, we need critical thinkers. We need problem solvers who can think across all the different functions. So
Right.
I'm not in, yes, there's a role for the accountant who's really good at rolling up the numbers, but wow, if you're an accountant who knows how to do that, but on top of that can talk the language of everyone else in the organization and then the stakeholders outside of your organization, I mean, you're indispensable, I think.
Right.
And so to me, I would highly encourage that people give it a shot. It's a passage, it's a rite of passage, and it takes a little bit of patience, but in the long run, the rewards are fantastic.
So, as with all our guests, I'd love to, I guess I should ask if anybody has any questions for Mark. And I want to just ask you if you look, given your career and where you are today, what is it that you want to be, what mark do you want to leave on the profession and on in the industry that you've been working at for now over 25 years?
It's a tough question. It's not something that,
It's
again,
not something you think about, right?
It's not part of the calculus of why you do these things. But if reflecting on it, I think certainly specialty pharma, which again is what I've been doing specifically the last 20 odd years, hasn't always had a good name, Anthony, right? We've had
I know.
our fair share of bad actors,
Yep.
the Shkreli's of the world. So if my experience can demonstrate that it's not all like that, that there is a model that is successful and profitable and good for all stakeholders. And I genuinely mean that. It's got to be good for investors, but it's got to be good for the system, for patients as well.
Right.
I think we've demonstrated that it is. That is a success in and of itself. And I started Searchlight arguably at the worst time in the world. Literally, the valuations on public spec pharmas imploded about a year afterward. So I remember my investors looking at me saying, how the heck will we ever exit given what's happened, right? And there were a whole lot of artificial things that were propping up valuations at the time, tax inversion deals and everything else. So, again, that focus on the fundamental part of the business, which is to better serve patients and their healthcare providers, that can be done in an efficient, smart way. You can attract assets that fall outside of the scope of the larger pharmas and biotechs, and you can run a really attractive, profitable business. And I guess the other part of it is the fact that we did create an attractive, profitable business. We attracted the attention of Apotex. And I think what I'm genuinely most excited about is that, you start to think about it as, at the close to 10-year mark, people start asking that question of legacy. For me, the fact that we get an opportunity to potentially contribute a business vertical that Apotex does not have, which is the branded, innovative part of the business, and the fact that it will survive as part of Apotex, that's the best legacy. The opportunity to potentially build a national champion headquartered in Canada, staffed primarily by Canadians and run by Canadians, I find that exciting. And, if COVID taught us anything, it's that not having a strong local industry
Yep.
is a challenge for us in time of crisis. So I think, again, building a national player that can really flex some muscle on at least a regional, if not global basis, to me is truly exciting. And I think if that succeeds, that'll be the best legacy of all.
Nice. All our, those that are watching that have followed a number of the sessions know I always like to have interesting cufflinks. Today I wore my Canada cufflinks. These are the 1967 with the Canada flag on it, celebration quarters. So I love it. I'm with you 100%. We have to make this country the best in the world. Okay, two quick things I always like to ask my guests: your favorite book?
Oh, this is such a hard question, Anthony.
Well, I understand. They're all hard questions, Mark.
I am, so look, I don't think I have a favorite. I could throw, I have been in my more recent life a reader of nonfiction, and I tend to pick up books when I travel. Probably one of the more interesting ones I read, I was in Berlin with my daughter a couple of years ago, and we were doing a walking tour, and the guide started telling us stories about drug use amongst the German armies, and that the Blitzkrieg was all fueled by drug use, methamphetamines. I mean, I was a student of history in my undergraduate years. I didn't know that. Completely revolutionized my thinking about the war. And so this book by a guy named Norman Ohler, who was a DJ in the underground East Berlin scene, kind of pre-fall of the Berlin Wall, did all this research in the National Archives, both in the former East as well as West. And he wrote a book called Blitzed, just absolutely fascinating. And there are a bunch of others there. But I'll say that my 21-year-old, who's an English student at the moment, has told me, "Dad, you got to read more fiction." And he's right, because there is value in literature and tapping into your creative side. And so I tapped into what a lot of people did. I've been reading the Cormac McCarthy books ever since he's passed away. So just recently finished All the Pretty Horses, which is just a fantastic book. Loved the simplicity of his writing, and yet he expresses so much. It's so vivid in his description. So a couple of my things that I've been reading and like.
Thanks for that, Mark. And lastly, your favorite breakfast meal, and if you have a restaurant that you want to recommend on that.
Listen, my daughter would say I'm not a breakfast guy. I always think that as a CPA, as a CA, it's the most overpriced meal of the day. I guess the restaurants have to make their margin somewhere. And there's also the fact I'm not a morning guy, so I don't function the very best at breakfast, even though I had a breakfast meeting this morning. Probably the best breakfast I've ever had, and it's not going to be good for a business breakfast, but if anyone listening wants to treat themselves, I was lucky enough this summer to do a trip to Italy. I was in Modena, and there's a famous chef in Modena, Massimo Bottura, who together with his wife opened up a boutique hotel named after his mother. So it's called Casa Maria Luigia. And he serves breakfast at this hotel, which is incredible. It is effectively, he recreates what his childhood memories of Christmas Day were growing up with his family. And he serves everything that his family would have at breakfast. It's absolutely spectacular. It's a treat. And again, Casa Maria Luigia, Massimo Bottura. If you're ever lucky enough to be in the area of Modena, go. It's worth it. It's a beautiful place. Treat yourself once and try it out.
I wrote it down. We'll have it in the notes, and I'll definitely keep that in mind. Mark, thank you. Continued success, and all the best.
Thank you, Anthony. All the best.
Thanks, everyone.